Today, we are introducing a very important technology in the field of video and image generation. It is called pose alignment. What exactly is its function? Let me give you a simple example. For instance, if I currently have a video of someone dancing, we can use it as a driving video. By utilizing the pose alignment technique, I can generate dancing videos from various perspectives. Pay attention to these characters. Their dancing movements are all the same. However, the overall perspective presentation is different. Take a look. This is a full body perspective. Similarly, this is also a full body perspective. Then we can zoom in the camera. Look, this is a perspective from above the knees. We can continue to zoom in the camera, and this perspective is from above the waist. By the time we reach this video, the entire perspective has zoomed in to above the chest. The main technology that allows us to use one driving video to generate works with so many different perspectives is the pose alignment we just mentioned. At this point, we will use an extension. This extension is called Proportion Changer. It officially provides an example workflow demonstrating the basic usage of this extension. First, please note that there is an image of a person here. We can use a node provided by it to extract the pose. Then we have another reference image here. Similarly, we can also extract the pose from this one, but you must note that the output from these two nodes is JSON data. Then we use a reference transformation node that can convert the same pose to different body proportions. Take a look. This is for a realistic character, and then we convert it to this character. Notice that the pose hasn't changed, but the body proportions have changed to that of this anime character. This is a very important function of this node. Of course, in addition to switching body proportions, viewpoint switching is also very important. This technology can be used in various applications below. We will explain them to you one by one. I have also built the workflow on RunningHub. You can access this platform through RunningHub in the ComfyUI domain. RunningHub is an excellent online workspace because whenever new technologies and extensions emerge, it follows up immediately. You can register for RunningHub using the invitation link in my video description. This way, you can get 1,000 free points. Additionally, you will receive 100 bonus points just by logging into RunningHub daily. This allows you to try out your own workflows. Now, let's show you the different scenarios where this technology can be used. The first scenario is its use within ControlNet. Here, we will use ControlNet of Z-Image-Turbo as an example. This is a workflow we used in a previous video. Please note that this pose reference image is a 3D model. Therefore, its inherent proportions are somewhat different from those of a real person. Then I can use a reference image like this to make it more coordinated. How do we achieve this? We use some very useful nodes here. Take a look. First, I will rescale the reference image. Then we first extract its pose. Note that this pose is not extracted using OpenPose or DW OpenPose. The pose detection node we use here is provided by the extension we just talked about. But you need to note that the result obtained by this node is in JSON format. As we showed you earlier, the data is in this structure. If you want to turn it into visual data, we provide another node. This node is called the pose render node. Here you can choose whether to render the body, face, hands, and various other components. There are some other parameter settings, but generally we can keep the default setting. Now, the pose output from this image is this. Similarly, we have another image here. We still scale it first to align the overall resolution. We also use the DW pose detector here to detect the pose. But note that we now connect its JSON output to this point. At this stage, there is a transformation node called Proportion Changer Reference. This means we will adjust our original pose based on the pose of our reference image. Please note, the basic shape of the pose will not change. It is just that the perspective and body proportions may have some adjustments. The final effect looks like this. If you compare these two images, you will find that the poses are the same, but the body proportions are slightly different. Look, for example, the legs are visibly longer here, especially in the calf area, because the main characteristic of this beautiful woman is long legs. Of course, we can also see the change in perspective. Look at the proportion of the character occupying the image. It almost fills the entire picture. We are referring to the vertical direction. You will find that the generated result is also aligned with it. This generated pose now looks more like a real person. Therefore, this image has a much better effect than the one generated by directly using the original pose. Of course, you can try switching to other images. Since the differences in human body proportions aren't too drastic, the visual impact might not be huge. Now, let's look at some uses in the field of video generation. Look at this workflow. This is the Steady Dancer workflow that we introduced previously. We'll quickly review this workflow. Since it is a reference-based generation, we have a reference image here and a driving video here. We will utilize the Steady Dancer video to perform reference generation. I also have an acceleration LoRa here. The core node of this reference generation is still based on the pose. We have already discussed the basic structure of the entire workflow before, so I won't go into detail here. Then, after our sampling, we can obtain the final video. As you can see, the overall workflow is Steady Dancer. However, there are some slight differences in how we handle the poses. You should note that the two characters actually have slightly different perspectives, although both are full body perspectives. Clearly, the body takes up a larger proportion in the video, while the reference image proportion is smaller. Now let's see how we handle this. We first use two very important nodes. Both nodes are used to detect the pose. One detects the pose of the driving video. The other detects the pose of our reference image. Then we use the pose reference node to make the pose of our driving video reference the pose of the reference image. In this way, the result we get is aligned with the entire reference image, and then we render it. That is the result you are seeing now. You will find that this pose is actually aligned with our reference image. This makes the generation effect much better. Let's look at the final result. The consistency of the character composition, as well as the overall presentation and the fluidity of the movements. I think they are all excellent. Of course, if all generations are full body perspectives, the effect might not be so obvious. Let's switch to another one. Note that the workflow is essentially the same. Now I will now change the reference image to a half body, or perhaps a larger than half body perspective. Now please note, after alignment, observe this pose image. It also outputs a half body perspective. Then we use it to generate the video. The effect of this video is also aligned with our reference image. The resulting quality will be much better than videos generated directly using the pose from the driving video. Let's look at one more. Actually, this perspective is slightly further away than the previous one. It is essentially a perspective above the knees. The entire workflow remains unchanged. Let's also check the generated pose image. You can see it is aligned with the reference image. Now let's look at the final generation effect. Take a look. The entire body pose is completely aligned with the reference image. Therefore, the quality of the final generated video is also very high. Zooming the camera closer, at this point, it is basically a perspective from above the waist. Similarly, the pose image also changes to a perspective above the waist. Let's look at the final generation effect. At this stage, you might feel more comfortable watching it, because when the perspective is pulled in closer, the face of the beautiful woman looks clearer. So, this type of perspective might make people feel that the video is clearer. This is actually because the facial features are clearer. Finally, let's zoom in this perspective again. This is almost a perspective from above the chest. The generated pose image will change accordingly, and the final result will also be adjusted based on our reference image. Take a look. When the perspective is zoomed in too closely, many key details of the action are lost. Therefore, when creating these action-based videos, we generally do not recommend zooming the perspective too close, unless you are specifically focusing on the face or a close-up of a certain part. Generally, I think this perspective above the waist is quite good. Or if you want to show the overall content, a perspective above the knees is also a good option. Alternatively, you can simply provide a full body view to give people a more comprehensive understanding of the entire character. Through our demonstration just now, you might have realized the importance of pose alignment, but note that this technique is not foolproof. Why do I say that? For example, let me give you this demonstration now. I will now change this character. This is a side view perspective. If I run this workflow now, let's see what happens. What you observe directly is that the pose looks somewhat distorted. Therefore, when using such reference poses, try to use front-facing views. Do not mix a front view with a side view. If you do, you will get a distorted pose, and the quality of the generated images and videos will not be very high. This is an issue you need to pay attention to when using this technology. Based on the demonstrations I just gave, you can certainly feel that pose alignment is indeed very important. Whether it is for image generation or video generation, you can look at the example workflow later. It contains examples not only for Steady Dancer, but also for other models. You can try them out yourself. All right, that is all for today. Follow me to become an AI expert.